How
Midday
dare
light
you
poured
stand
through
there
the glass
silently after
walls.
the mess you made?
A man in a
You
gray
think this is a
uniform stood in the
joke?
corner,
You are finished
silently
here if you
wiping
can't handle
down
this simple
tables.
task.
The young CEO leaned forward, her voice ice cold. "Careful, janitor. That phone costs more than your entire month's salary." Laughter erupted around the table. He didn't react. He simply placed the phone flat on the glass surface, then pressed down hard. Crack. The sound shattered every laugh in the room. A small metal object fell from the case, rolling to a stop beside her hand. Light reflected off her face. She turned pale white. The entire room held its breath. He stood silent, just wiping away the remaining glass dust with his cloth. Caleb Vance, single dad, former rescue service, now a temporary janitor at Grant & Company. Every morning before work, he drank coffee at a small shop with his 7-year-old daughter, Leah. She loved to draw. Leah wrote on a piece of paper, "Respect is a quiet language," the phrase her father always said. He told her to stick it on the corner of her desk, to remember that respect doesn't need a loud voice. When Caleb stepped into the company building, nobody paid attention. Just a few employees glancing with contempt. One whispered, "Used to be military, now mopping floors. How sad." He heard it, but he didn't react. In the conference room, CEO Evelyn Grant was reviewing plans for Valor Square, a memorial park dedicated to her father, Captain Owen Grant. Caleb was assigned to clean the room before the meeting. As he bent down, Evelyn walked in with her PR team. The scent of perfume and the sound of high heels echoed against the reflective floor. She frowned. "Hurry up. Don't leave any marks," he answered simply. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him more closely. "Where did you serve?" "A place where people didn't ask about titles." He lowered his head, kept wiping. A metallic glint reflected from a tag beneath his shirt. She caught a glimpse, but didn't pay attention. On his way home, Leah called, "Dad, I stuck your quote on the classroom wall. The teacher loved it." Caleb smiled. "One day you'll understand why it matters." He hung up, looked at the building reflecting the afternoon sun. The image of father and daughter merged into the glass window, like two parallel worlds. The next morning came quietly. Caleb arrived early. The lobby was empty. He pushed his cart through the halls, the wheels squeaking softly on polished marble. In the break room, 2 junior executives stood by the coffee machine. "Did you hear? The old man's daughter is running this place now." "Yeah, all talk about honor and legacy. Meanwhile, she's cutting benefits." And they noticed Caleb, lowered their voices, walked away. He wiped down the counter, found a photo someone had dropped. It showed a military ceremony. Captain Owen Grant shaking hands with soldiers. Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then placed it on the lost and found shelf. That afternoon, Evelyn held a staff meeting in the glass-walled boardroom. Caleb was cleaning the adjacent hallway. Through the transparent walls, he could see her gesturing confidently, pointing at architectural renderings of Valor Square. Her voice carried through the glass. "My father believed honor should be visible, celebrated. This park will ensure his legacy is never forgotten." Applause filled the room. Caleb paused. His hand rested on the cleaning cart. He looked down at the metal tag hanging from his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, worn and scratched. He whispered to himself, "Honor doesn't need a stage, Captain." Evening came. Leah was doing homework at the kitchen table when he got home. She looked up. "Dad, what does quiet language mean?" He sat beside her. "It means some things don't need to be said out loud to be true." She thought about it, then nodded. "Like when you help people but don't tell anyone." He touched her head gently. "Exactly like that." Outside the window, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one. In the distance, the Grant & Company tower stood tall, its windows glowing like a beacon. But Caleb wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking at his daughter, writing those words again on a fresh piece of paper, carefully, slowly. Respect is a quiet language. Launch day for Valor Square arrived. Evelyn appeared before the media. Cameras flashed, microphones clustered around her like hungry birds. She spoke with practiced confidence. "Honor must be visible. My father is proof of that." Applause rippled through the crowd. Caleb stood in the back. hidden behind a pillar, wiping down tables after the press conference. An employee rushed in with coffee, tripped on a cable. The cup flew from her hands. Coffee splashed across the conference table. Droplets hit Evelyn's phone. The room froze. Evelyn stared at the stain on her phone case. Her jaw tightened. "Do you know how much this costs?" Nervous laughter broke out from the management team. Caleb stepped forward quietly. "I'll clean it, ma'am." She turned to him, her voice sharp, cold. "If you touch it again, you're fired." The entire room went silent. Every eye turned to him. He looked at the phone, then at her. His expression didn't change. He picked it up, placed it flat on the glass table, and pressed down. Crack. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. A piece of the case broke away. Something small fell out, rolled across the table. Metal glinted under the lights. Evelyn leaned forward, her breath caught. Engraved words, worn but clear. Captain Owen Grant. Her lips trembled. Her hand covered her mouth. Caleb's voice was steady, quiet. "Returning it to the right person," she whispered. "Where did you get this?" "From where it belongs." He bent down, picked up the glass shards, and walked away. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Questions flew. Someone grabbed their phone to record. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the metal tag in her palm, her father's name, warm against her skin. By evening, the news spread like wildfire. Janitor destroys CEO's phone, suspended immediately. The headline appeared on internal company channels. Screenshots circulated. Speculation ran wild. Caleb sat in the parking garage, his work uniform still on. He called home. "Leah, sweetheart, Dad's coming home late. Did you remember to read our phrase?" Her small voice came through the speaker, clear and proud. "Respect is a quiet language." He smiled. "That's right. Keep it safe." He hung up, looked at his reflection in the car window. The metal tag around his neck swayed slightly. "Captain," he whispered, "I'm still doing my part." That night, everything changed. An emergency alarm blared through the building at 2 a.m. The fire safety system malfunctioned. Sprinklers failed. Backup generators didn't kick in. The entire company faced potential shutdown. Evelyn called an emergency meeting at dawn. "The maintenance team is responsible for this," she snapped. The head of maintenance shook his head. "Our systems were sabotaged. We need an expert, someone who knows military-grade equipment." Evelyn's assistant spoke up. "The janitor, Caleb Vance. His file says he was a rescue specialist. Bomb disposal, emergency systems." Evelyn hesitated. "He was suspended. He's still on the premises. Never left." She found him in the basement, surrounded by exposed wiring, toolbox open, flashlight in his mouth. He didn't look up when she approached. "Mr. Vance." "Ma'am, why are you still here?" He connected two wires. Sparks flew briefly. "Because the job isn't finished." She watched him work, his hands steady, confident, every movement precise. "The tag," she said softly. "My father's tag. How did you—" He cut her off. Not rudely, just matter of fact. "Karbala, 10 years ago. I was pinned under debris after an IED explosion. Your father pulled me out, gave me this." He tapped his chest. "Told me if I survived, give it to his daughter. And teach her something." Evelyn's voice cracked. "Teach me what?" "That honor doesn't need applause." Silence filled the basement. Only the hum of machinery, the drip of water from old pipes. He finished reconnecting the system, stood up, wiped his hands on his uniform. "Systems back online. You're good for the morning inspection." He picked up his toolbox, started to walk away. "Wait." Her voice stopped him. "What else did he say?" Caleb turned. His eyes met hers for the first time. Really met them. "He said his daughter was strong, but strength without respect is just noise." He paused. "And that you'd understand, eventually." A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought honoring him meant showing everyone, building monuments, making speeches." "Monuments fade, ma'am. Words echo, but the way you treat people? He gestured around the basement. That's forever. Morning light began filtering through the narrow basement windows. Caleb gathered his things. The inspection team arrives at 8. You'll pass. How do you know? Because your father taught me how to fix things, not just machines. He looked at her meaningfully. People too. He left her standing there, alone, holding the metal tag. She looked down at it. Her father's name, scratched, dented, real. Above her, footsteps echoed. The building was waking up, staff arriving, preparing for the inspection. But down here in the quiet of the basement, something else was waking up. A memory, a lesson, a truth. Her father's voice, distant but clear. Respect is a quiet language. She closed her fist around the tag, and for the first time in years she understood. Morning arrived with sharp urgency. The emergency board meeting, 8 a.m. sharp. Auditors filled the conference room, clipboards, stern faces, zero tolerance for failure. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, tailored suit, composed exterior. But her hand kept touching the pocket where she'd placed the metal tag. The lead auditor spoke first. Miss Grant, your facility experienced a critical system failure. Lives were at risk. Who is responsible for the resolution? She opened her mouth to respond. The door opened. Caleb walked in, still in his dusty uniform, tool belt hanging from his waist. Every head turned. I am, he said simply. Murmurs rippled through the room. An auditor frowned. And you are? Caleb Vance, maintenance. A janitor? Another auditor scoffed. We're discussing life safety systems and… I know what you're discussing. Caleb's voice was calm, steady. I'm the one who fixed them. Evelyn stared at him, her mouth slightly open. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 items, placed them on the conference table. 2 metal tags, side by side. One was his, name, serial number, service record. The other was Captain Owen Grant's. The room went completely silent. Caleb looked directly at the auditors, then at Evelyn. 10 years ago, Karbala battlefield. I was trapped under a collapsed building after an IED detonation. Alone, injured, out of communication. His voice carried weight, not loud, but undeniable. A man found me, Captain Owen Grant. He didn't have to. His unit was already evacuating, but he came back. He touched the captain's tag. He dug for 40 minutes, alone, under enemy fire, pulled me out, carried me 300 meters to the extraction point. Evelyn's hand covered her mouth. Tears pooled in her eyes. Before the helicopter took me, he gave me this. Caleb lifted the tag. He said if I survived, I had to promise him something. What? Evelyn's voice barely audible. Find his daughter, give her this, and teach her what he never had time to. The auditors shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard procedure, but nobody interrupted. He told me his daughter was brilliant, driven, strong, but that strength without respect becomes arrogance, and arrogance makes you blind. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. Leah's handwriting. He unfolded it carefully, placed it next to the tags. Respect is a quiet language. My daughter wrote this. She's 7. She doesn't know your father, never met him, but somehow she wrote the exact words he said to me that day. Evelyn stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly. She walked to the table, picked up the paper with trembling hands. My father, she whispered. He used to say this every night before bed. Her voice broke. I forgot he said that. Tears streamed down her face now. She didn't try to hide them. After he died, I thought honoring him meant building things, big things, visible things. I thought if the world could see his name, carved in stone, lit by spotlights. She laughed bitterly. I thought that was respect. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him. But you've been here for weeks, cleaning floors, invisible, and you carried his memory more powerfully than anything I've built. Caleb's expression softened. Ma'am, your father didn't ask me to build him a monument. What did he ask? He asked me to remind you that honor isn't about being seen. It's about being worthy when no one's watching. The lead auditor cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Miss Grant, we still need to address the system failure. She straightened, wiped her eyes, turned to face them. The system failure was resolved because of this man, a former combat rescue specialist. Someone I dismissed as just a janitor. Someone who worked through the night without pay, without recognition, to save this company. She picked up both metal tags, held them up. My father saved lives in silence. This man fixed our building in silence. And I've been shouting about honor while understanding nothing about it. One of the auditors spoke. Your maintenance systems are now compliant, but we need accountability. Evelyn nodded. Then hold me accountable. I'm the one who failed to see value where it actually existed. Caleb stepped back. The building is safe. That's all that matters. No! Evelyn's voice was firm now. It's not all that matters. She turned to her assistant. Cancel the Valor Square groundbreaking. Gas filled the room. Ma'am, Cancel it. We're redesigning the entire project. She looked at Caleb. The park will not be a monument to my father's name. It will be a memorial to the people who serve quietly, the ones whose names don't make headlines. The rescue workers, the janitors, the people who fix what's broken when everyone else has gone home. The room erupted in whispers. An auditor stood. Miss Grant, with all due respect, that's not what your board approved. Then I'll get new approval, or I'll fund it myself. Her voice cut through the noise. My father didn't die so his name could be on a plaque. He died saving people who nobody remembers. She placed the tags down gently, reverently. This building stands because of Mr. Vance. My father lived because he believed people were worth saving, whether anyone noticed or not. I've spent 2 years planning a park that celebrates the wrong thing. Evelyn walked to Caleb, extended her hand. Thank you for keeping your promise and for teaching me what my father couldn't. He shook her hand. He already taught you, ma'am. You just forgot for a while. A long silence. Then one of the auditors began to clap. Slowly, another joined, then another. Not loud, not enthusiastic. Just respectful, genuine. Caleb picked up his tool belt. I should get back to work. Mr. Vance, Evelyn's voice stopped him at the door. You're not a janitor anymore. He turned slightly. You're director of facility operations. Effective immediately. He smiled faintly. That's a fancy title for the same work, ma'am. Then do the same work, but let me pay you properly for it. He nodded once and left. The door closed behind him. Evelyn looked down at the 3 items on the table. 2 tags, 1 piece of paper. A drop of water fell from somewhere above, landed on the glass. The reflection scattered light across the tags, making them shine, like 2 stars, side by side. One auditor spoke quietly. That was unexpected. Evelyn smiled through her tears. My father always said the best lessons are. She picked up the paper, Leah's careful handwriting. Respect is a quiet language. And today, she whispered, I finally learned to speak it. The news spread like wildfire through the company. Internal memo, sent at 10 a.m. CEO publicly thanks former combat veteran for reminding us what honor truly means. Employees gathered around computer screens, reading, rereading. Some felt ashamed, others inspired. In the maintenance office, Caleb's old locker remained untouched. Someone had taped a note to it. Thank you for your service, both then and now. He found it when he returned to collect his things. He stood there for a moment, just looking at the words, then carefully folded the note, put it in his pocket. Evelyn found him in the basement, the same place they'd talked before. She descended the stairs slowly. No clicking heels this time, just sneakers. Jeans, a simple white shirt. Mr. Vance. He looked up from the circuit panel he was inspecting. Ma'am, I thought I told you, you're not maintenance anymore. Old habits. He smiled slightly. And someone needs to check these connections. She stepped closer. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I wanted to say something, away from the cameras. The board members. All of it. He waited. I built my entire career on my father's legacy. I thought that's what he would have wanted. His name everywhere. His story told and retold. She paused. But I was building a monument to my grief, not to him. Caleb closed the circuit panel, wiped his hands on a rag. Grief makes us do strange things, ma'am. You carried his tag for 10 years, traveled across the country to find me, took a janitor job just to get close enough to give it back. Her voice cracked. That's not strange. That's devotion. It's a promise kept, nothing more. It's everything more. She reached into her pocket, pulled out both tags, his and her father's. When he pulled you out, did he know that he probably wouldn't make it? Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes. What did he say? In those last moments? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Inevitable. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the daughter, not the CEO. He said, tell her I was proud, not of what she'll accomplish, but of who she'll become. Then he said, tell her respect is a quiet language, and she already knows how to speak it. She just needs to remember. Evelyn's hands covered her face, shoulders shaking, silent sobs. Caleb stood there, uncertain, then awkwardly placed a hand on her shoulder. He believed in you, more than you know. She looked up, eyes red. I've spent 5 years screaming his name, and you've spent 10 years whispering his lesson. Maybe that's what he needed. Both. No. She shook her head. He needed me to understand, and I didn't, not until you broke that phone. A faint smile crossed Caleb's face. That was an expensive lesson. She laughed through tears, worth every penny. They stood in comfortable silence. The building hummed around them, alive, functional. The new park design, she said. I want your input. I'm not an architect. No, but you understand what my father valued, and that's more important than blueprints. He nodded slowly. What are you thinking? Small plaques, no names, just professions. A janitor served here, a teacher taught here, a soldier protected here. Spaces where people can sit, reflect, remember the quiet ones. He would have liked that. Will you help me? Not as director of operations, as someone who knew him. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, on one condition. Anything. My daughter, Leah. She wants to contribute something, a drawing, her words. Can she? Evelyn smiled, genuine, warm. I would be honored. They walked upstairs together. The basement doors closed behind them. In the lobby, employees stopped, stared, then nodded respectfully. Caleb felt uncomfortable with the attention, but he didn't hide anymore. That afternoon, the inspection team returned. Final walkthrough. They went through every floor, every system, every safety protocol. The lead inspector approached Evelyn. Everything is not just compliant, it's exceptional. Whoever handled this treated it like lives depended on it. They did, she said simply. And lives do. The inspector nodded. Approved, full certification. Your company is cleared. Applause erupted from the gathered staff, but Evelyn didn't join. She walked to where Caleb stood, in the back, near the exit. Thank you, she said quietly. Just doing the job. No, you did more. You saved this building. You saved me from becoming someone my father wouldn't recognize. He looked at her. He would recognize you. He'd be proud. How do you know? Because you listened, and listening is the first word in that quiet language. She smiled, extended her hand. Not as CEO to employee, but as equals. He shook it. A photographer from the company newsletter approached. Can I get a picture for? No, they both said simultaneously. The photographer looked confused. Evelyn smiled. Some moments don't need cameras. She turned to Caleb. Tomorrow, bring Leah. Let's show her the park plans, get her ideas. She'd like that. Good. 10 a.m. And Mr. Vance? Yes, ma'am. Call me Evelyn. We're past formalities now. He smiled. Evelyn. She walked away, back to her office, back to her work. But something had changed. In her posture, in her expression. She moved differently now, less like someone carrying a burden, more like someone who finally understood what the wait was for. Caleb left through the side door, the same door he'd entered every day for weeks. But today was different. Today people noticed. Today they understood. And that quiet language, it was finally being heard. The next morning arrived with golden light. Sunlight poured through the glass walls of the building. Caleb wiped down tables in the lobby. Old routine, new meaning. Leah sat on a stone bench nearby, sketchbook open, drawing yesterday's scene. Evelyn walked through the entrance. No high heels, no power suit, just white sneakers and a comfortable blazer. She stopped when she saw them. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," he smiled. "Good morning, Evelyn." She paused, then smiled back. "That's better." She approached Leah, knelt down beside the bench. "What are you drawing?" Leah looked up, shy at first, then held up the sketchbook. 3 hands, one belonging to her father, one to Evelyn, one to someone unseen. In the center, 2 metal tags, glowing. "It's about people who help each other," Leah said softly, "even when nobody's watching." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "That's beautiful. My dad says respect is a quiet language." "Your dad is very wise." Evelyn touched the drawing gently. "Can I ask you something?" Leah nodded. "Would you draw this for the new park, so everyone who visits can see it?" Leah's eyes widened. "Really? Really? Because some lessons can't be written on plaques. They need to be felt." She looked at Caleb. "Your father taught me that." Caleb rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "What do you say, sweetheart?" "Yes, I want to help." Evelyn stood, looked at both of them. Father and daughter, simple, honest, real. "You know what I realized?" she said. "My father didn't save people for recognition. He saved them because it was right. And you didn't keep your promise for reward. You kept it because you loved him." Caleb nodded. He was worth loving. "So are you." The 3 of them stood there, in the morning light, in the quiet, no cameras, no speeches, no applause, just understanding. Evelyn glanced at her watch. "The architects are coming at 10. Want to stay for the presentation?" Leah looked up at her father. He smiled. "We'd be honored." As they walked toward the conference room together, Evelyn noticed the small piece of paper in Leah's hand. The same words, in careful crayon. "Respect is a quiet language." "Can I keep that?" Evelyn asked gently. Leah thought about it, then handed it over. "You can have it, but you have to promise to remember." "I promise." And in that moment, 3 generations connected. One who served, one who learned, one who would carry it forward. The building hummed around them, alive with purpose. And somewhere, in the space between words, Captain Owen Grant smiled. Because some lessons don't die. They whisper, they wait. And when the right person finally listens, they echo forever. Which moment gave you chills? When he crushed the phone, or when she finally said, "I finally speak it"? Drop your city name below. Let's map where respect still lives. Let's prove the quiet language is still spoken. Where are you watching from? Comment your city. Let's see how far this story travels.
Undercover CEO orders steak. Waitress secretly slips him a note that stops him cold. Inside the dimly lit diner, Dahlia Raymond wiped her trembling hands on her apron for the 3rd time. The 34-year-old waitress had been serving the same mysterious customer for weeks now. Always alone. Always ordering the same steak dinner. Always leaving before midnight. But tonight, she couldn't keep pretending she didn't know who he was. With shaking hands, she approached his usual corner booth, the folded napkin burning like fire in her pocket. Cage, a powerful CEO, ordered his usual without looking up, his mind clearly elsewhere, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table as his phone continued buzzing with urgent calls from board members, investors, and executives who needed decisions only he could make. Dahlia set the perfectly cooked steak in front of him, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the plate. In one swift motion, she slid the folded napkin underneath, her heart stopping as she watched him cut into his meal, completely unaware of what waited beneath. Then it happened. Cage lifted his plate slightly to adjust his napkin, and there it was. A simple piece of paper that would shatter his world. His eyes scanned the words once, twice, his face draining of all color. The fork clattered to the plate as he read the message that stopped him cold. If you're already hooked by this incredible story of secrets, redemption, and the power of truth, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens next will blow your mind. To understand what happens next, you need to know who these two people really are, because their lives are about to collide in ways neither of them could have imagined. Cage Daxton wasn't supposed to be sitting in a diner at 11 at night. As the CEO of Daxton Industries, a manufacturing empire worth over $2 billion, he should have been at home in his penthouse, or at least in his office closing another multi-million-dollar deal. But Cage couldn't sleep. He hadn't been able to sleep properly in months, not since he'd inherited the company from his father 8 months ago. The insomnia started right around the time his divorce was finalized, and his 17-year-old daughter Megan stopped taking his calls. Success, it turned out, came with a price he hadn't expected to pay. So most nights he found himself driving the empty highways around the city, trying to outrun the weight of decisions that kept him awake. Decisions about layoffs, plant closures, and cost-cutting measures that affected thousands of families he'd never meet. That's how he discovered Danny's Diner 3 weeks ago. A 24-hour refuge where he could sit alone, eat the same steak dinner, and pretend for an hour that he was just another customer, not the man responsible for the livelihoods of 15,000 employees. But Dahlia Raymond knew exactly who he was, and she'd known from the very first night he walked through those doors. Dahlia was 34, but the past 6 months had aged her in ways that showed in the tired lines around her eyes and the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion she couldn't shake. She worked double shifts at Danny's Diner 6 nights a week. Not because she loved the job, but because she had no choice. Her husband Liam had been gone for 6 months now, and the medical bills from his final weeks were drowning her. Every night, she watched Cage sit in booth 7, ordering his steak medium rare, always polite, always alone, always leaving a generous tip that kept her from falling even further behind on her bills. What he didn't know was that she recognized his face from the newspaper articles she'd been collecting. Articles about Daxton Industries' new CEO, the son taking over his father's empire. But tonight was different. Tonight, Dahlia couldn't keep pretending she didn't know who he was because her 8-year-old son Tyler needed surgery for a heart condition they'd discovered just last week, and she was about to lose the house she and Liam had bought with such hope just 2 years ago. As Cage stared at that note, his mind raced through the possibilities. A disgruntled employee? A business competitor trying to sabotage him? But when he looked up into Dahlia's eyes, he saw something that shook him more than any corporate threat ever could. He saw grief. "You're Dahlia," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the diner's late-night hum. "And you're Cage Daxton," she replied, her voice trembling but steady. "Your picture was in the business section every week after you took over the company. I've been serving you for 3 weeks, and every night I've wanted to tell you that my husband Liam worked for you." The word "worked" hit Cage like a physical blow. Past tense. Liam worked for him. Liam Raymond. Dahlia continued, pulling a worn employee badge from her apron pocket. He was at the Riverside manufacturing plant, worked there for 7 years. He loved that job, believed in your company, believed that hard work and loyalty meant something. Cage's hands shook as he looked at the badge. The photo showed a man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, wearing the same Daxton Industries uniform that thousands of his employees put on every day. "There was an accident," Dahlia whispered, her voice breaking. 6 months ago, a machine malfunctioned on the factory floor. The safety protocols that should have prevented it had been delayed. Maintenance that should have been done wasn't. Liam was caught in the machinery. The diner seemed to spin around Cage. He'd heard about accidents, of course. They were part of the reports that crossed his desk, statistics and insurance claims that his assistants handled. But he'd never seen the face of the man behind the numbers, never sat across from his widow. He spent 4 months in the hospital, Dahlia continued, pulling out a photo of her family. A smiling man with his arms around a woman and a little boy. We had hope, you know. The doctors said he might recover. We held on to that hope even as the medical bills piled up, even as I had to take a second job, then a third. Cage studied the photo, seeing the love in Liam's eyes as he looked at his wife and son. This wasn't some faceless employee. This was a husband, a father, a man who'd trusted Daxton Industries with his life. I don't remember every employee, Cage said defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. There are thousands of people working for the company. Accidents happen in manufacturing. We have safety protocols. But even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. Because Dahlia was right there in front of him, living proof that those protocols had failed someone who'd counted on them. Liam used to come home and tell me about the plans he had, Dahlia said, tears streaming down her face now. He wanted to save enough money to take Tyler to Disney World. He was studying for a promotion, taking night classes so he could move up in the company. He believed that if he worked hard enough, loyal enough, your company would take care of us. That night, Cage couldn't drive home. He sat in his Mercedes outside the diner until dawn, Liam's employee badge and the family photo burning in his memory. For the first time since taking over the company, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or board meetings. He was thinking about a man named Liam Raymond, who trusted his company and paid for that trust with his life. The next night, Cage returned to the diner, and the night after that. Each time, Dahlia told him more about Liam, how he'd volunteer to work overtime whenever the company needed it. How he'd talk proudly about working for Daxton Industries, how he'd defend the company to friends who complained about corporate greed. He believed good companies took care of their people, Dahlia said during his 4th visit. Even at the end, when he was lying in that hospital bed, he kept saying it wasn't the company's fault. He said accidents happen, and that Daxton Industries would do right by us. But as Cage began digging into Liam's case, using his CEO access to pull records that had been buried in corporate files, he discovered a truth that made his blood run cold. The safety inspections had been delayed to save money. The machine maintenance had been postponed to meet quarterly profit targets. And the man who'd made those decisions was his father, the previous CEO, who'd prioritized the bottom line over the safety of employees like Liam Raymond. The reports were all there, hidden in executive files that only the CEO could access. Recommendations from plant managers about needed safety updates denied. Requests for equipment maintenance delayed. Warnings about potential accidents ignored. His father had built the Daxton Industries empire on the backs of loyal employees like Liam, and when those employees paid the price, the company had simply moved on. But the most devastating discovery came when Cage found a memo his father had written just days before his own death. A memo acknowledging that the company had acceptable losses in workplace accidents, and that legal settlements were simply a cost of doing business. Liam Raymond wasn't just an employee who died in an accident. He was a casualty of corporate decisions that valued profit over human life. As these revelations sank in, Cage realized something that terrified him. His late-night drives hadn't randomly led him to Danny's diner. Some part of him had been drawn there, pulled toward the reckoning he'd been avoiding. Toward Dahlia Raymond, the woman whose husband had died because of his family's business practices. During their 6th encounter, Dahlia revealed the crushing weight of her current reality. The house she and Liam had bought was in foreclosure. Tyler's heart condition required surgery they couldn't afford. And Danny's diner, the only stable job she had left, was being sold to a restaurant chain that planned to fire all the current staff. I work 3 jobs now, she said, exhaustion evident in every word. The diner, cleaning offices after midnight, and weekend shifts at a grocery store. But it's not enough. It's never enough. As Cage listened to her struggles, he began to understand something profound and disturbing. His insomnia, his failed marriage, his estrangement from his daughter, These weren't random misfortunes. They were the consequences of inheriting a legacy built on the suffering of families like the Raymonds. He wasn't just a successful CEO who happened to meet a grieving widow. He was the son of the man whose decisions had destroyed her life. And somehow the universe had brought them together in this unlikely place, at this impossible hour, for a reckoning that had been 6 months in the making. But here's where this story takes a turn that will absolutely shock you. Because what Cage discovered next changed everything he thought he knew about Dahlia Raymond and her true intentions. After weeks of sleepless nights, consumed by guilt over what his father's company had done to Liam Raymond, Cage made a decision that could have destroyed him. He hired the best private investigators money could buy to dig into every aspect of Liam's accident, fully expecting to find a lawsuit, compensation claims, or at the very least some kind of legal action against Daxton Industries. What he found instead left him speechless. There was nothing. No lawsuit, no compensation claim, no legal filings of any kind. Dahlia Raymond, a woman who had every right to destroy his company with the evidence she possessed, had never once tried to hold Daxton Industries accountable for her husband's death. The investigators confirmed what seemed impossible. Dahlia had medical records proving the company's negligence. She had documentation of the delayed safety inspections. She had witness statements from other employees who knew the accident could have been prevented. She had enough evidence to bring down a billion-dollar corporation and secure millions in compensation for herself and Tyler. And she'd done absolutely nothing with it. When Cage confronted her about this during what would become their most emotional conversation yet, Dahlia's response shattered every assumption he'd made about her motivations. "Why?" he demanded, his voice breaking with confusion and something that sounded almost like anger. "Why didn't you sue? Why didn't you take the company down? You could have destroyed us. You could have been set for life." Dahlia looked at him with tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, her words cut straight to Cage's soul. "Because Liam wouldn't have wanted that," she whispered. Even after everything that happened, even knowing that the company's decisions cost him his life, Liam still believed that good people could make bad situations right. He never lost faith that there were decent people in positions of power who would do the right thing when they knew the truth. But that wasn't even the most shocking revelation. Dahlia reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, worn from handling, filled with newspaper clippings. As she spread them across the diner table, Cage realized they were all about him. Every interview he'd given since taking over as CEO. Every article about his plans to reform corporate culture at Daxton Industries. Every speech he'd made about putting people before profits. "I'd been collecting these for months," Dahlia said, her voice barely audible. "Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was hoping that you were different from your father. Hoping that maybe Liam was right about good people making things right." Cage stared at the clippings, recognizing his own words staring back at him. Quotes about corporate responsibility, promises about creating a safer work environment, commitments to putting employee welfare first. All the things he'd said to the press, to investors, to the board of directors, never knowing that the widow of one of his father's victims was hanging on to every word. "There was one interview in particular," Dahlia continued, pulling out a highlighted article from 3 months ago. "You said that a company's true worth isn't measured in profits, but in how it treats the people who make those profits possible. You said that every employee who walks through the doors of a Daxton Industries facility should feel valued and protected." As Cage read his own words, he felt a crushing weight settle in his chest. Because he remembered giving that interview, remembered the careful media coaching, the strategic messaging designed to rebuild the company's public image after several workplace incidents had made headlines. But he also remembered believing what he was saying. Deep down, beneath all the corporate strategy and public relations maneuvering, he'd meant every word. "When I saw that interview," Dahlia said, "I started coming to work at this diner every night, hoping somehow I'd get the chance to meet you. To see if the man behind those words was real, or if it was just more corporate empty promises. The magnitude of what she was telling him hit Cage like a physical blow. For 3 weeks, he'd thought his visits to Danny's diner were random, driven by insomnia and a need to escape his responsibilities. But Dahlia had been waiting for him, watching for him, hoping against hope that he would prove to be the leader her husband had always believed existed somewhere in the corporate hierarchy. "You've been testing me," he said, the realization dawning on him slowly. "I've been hoping," she corrected. "Hoping that when you learned the truth about what happened to Liam, you'd do what your father never did. You'd make it right." If this story is giving you chills and making you believe in the power of hope and redemption, you need to subscribe right now, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever held on to hope for someone even when you had every reason to give up on them? Share your story in the comments, because Dahlia's unwavering faith in the possibility of good is about to change everything, and you won't believe how Cage responds to this incredible act of trust. The evidence folder Dahlia had been carrying wasn't a weapon for revenge. It was a test of character. And for the first time since inheriting his father's empire, Cage Daxton understood that he was being given something more precious than any business opportunity he'd ever encountered. He was being given a chance to prove that some promises are worth keeping, even when no one is watching, even when it costs everything. What happened next would either make Cage Daxton a hero or destroy everything he'd worked for his entire life. Because the decision he was about to make would shake the foundations of corporate America and put his billion-dollar empire on the line. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you love stories like this. The morning after Dahlia's revelation, Cage didn't go to his office. Instead, he spent 14 hours in his penthouse, surrounded by the evidence Dahlia had entrusted to him, along with the damning internal documents he'd uncovered about his father's cover-ups. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would change everything. At 7 a.m. sharp, Cage's assistant received a call that sent shockwaves through the executive floors of Daxton Industries. The CEO was calling an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. Mandatory attendance, no exceptions, no agenda provided. The 12 most powerful members of Daxton Industries' board of directors filed into the mahogany-paneled conference room that morning, expecting another routine quarterly review or perhaps news of a major acquisition. What they got instead was a reckoning that had been 6 months in the making. Cage entered that boardroom carrying 2 things: Dahlia's evidence folder and a resignation letter he'd written but wasn't sure he'd have the courage to use. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cage began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I've called you here to discuss something that should have been addressed years ago. The systematic cover-up of workplace safety violations that have cost lives." The board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as Cage began laying out documents on the conference table. Liam Raymond's case file, the delayed safety inspections, the buried maintenance reports, and then the evidence of other incidents, other families, other cover-ups that painted a picture of corporate negligence spanning decades. "This is Liam Raymond," Cage said, placing Liam's employee photo at the center of the table. "He worked for us for 7 years. He died because we chose profits over safety protocols. And he's not the only one." Board member Patricia Hoffman, a woman who'd worked alongside Cage's father for 20 years, was the first to speak. "Cage, these are isolated incidents. Every manufacturing company deals with workplace accidents. We have insurance for this." "Insurance?" Cage's voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. "We're talking about human lives, Patricia. Real people with families, with dreams, with children who will grow up without their fathers because we decided that quarterly profits mattered more than basic safety measures." The room erupted. Board member after board member tried to dismiss the evidence, to minimize the scope of the problem, to protect the company's reputation and their own financial interests. But Cage had spent months preparing for this moment, and he wasn't backing down. "I'm proposing a comprehensive compensation fund," Cage announced, his words cutting through the chaos. "Full compensation for the families of every employee who died due to our negligence. Complete medical coverage for injured workers. and a complete overhaul of our safety protocols at every facility. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, board member Richard Sterling, the company's longest-serving director, found his voice. Do you have any idea what you're proposing? The financial impact of what you're suggesting could bankrupt this company. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. I know exactly what I'm proposing, Cage replied. I'm proposing that we take responsibility for the consequences of decisions that prioritize shareholder profits over human lives. What happened next was a corporate power struggle unlike anything the business world had ever seen. One by one, the board members who had enabled his father's practices began pushing back, threatening everything Cage held dear. You're being emotional, Patricia Hoffman said, her voice cold and calculating. This is business, not charity. If you proceed with this reckless plan, we'll have no choice but to call for a vote of no confidence. The shareholders will never support this, added Sterling. You'll destroy everything your father built. Everything this company represents. But Cage had reached a point where the threats no longer mattered. Standing in that boardroom, surrounded by people who saw human lives as acceptable losses in the pursuit of profit, he finally understood what kind of leader he wanted to be. My father built this company on the backs of people like Liam Raymond, Cage said, his voice growing stronger with each word. He built it on the suffering of families who trusted us with their livelihoods and their lives, and I won't let it continue. The board members exchanged looks that could kill. They'd expected to intimidate the young CEO into backing down, to remind him that his position depended on their support. What they got instead was a man who'd found something worth fighting for. If you proceed with this, Sterling threatened, we'll remove you as CEO. The board has that power, and we won't hesitate to use it. Cage looked around the room at these people he'd once respected, these titans of industry who'd helped build his family's empire, and for the first time, he saw them clearly. They weren't successful business leaders. They were collaborators in a system that treated human life as a line item on a balance sheet. Then remove me, Cage said, pulling out the resignation letter he'd prepared. Because I'd rather lose this company than lose my soul. The boardroom erupted again, but this time it was different. Some members were shouting about fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value. Others were frantically calculating the financial implications of Cage's proposal. But in the midst of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Board member Jennifer Walsh, the youngest member of the board and a recent appointee, stood up and walked over to where Cage was standing. I second the motion for the compensation fund, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, and I support the complete safety overhaul. One by one, 3 other board members joined her. Not a majority, but enough to send a clear message that the tide was turning. The meeting that was supposed to last an hour stretched into 4 hours of heated debate, threats, and ultimately, a historic vote that would determine not just the future of Daxton Industries, but the precedent for corporate responsibility across the entire manufacturing sector. When the votes were finally counted, Cage had won by a single vote. The compensation fund was approved, the safety overhaul was approved, and for the first time in the company's history, Daxton Industries would put people before profits. But as Cage walked out of that boardroom, he knew the real battle was just beginning. Because implementing these changes wouldn't just cost money. It would require him to rebuild the entire culture of a company that had operated one way for decades. And somewhere in a diner across town, Dahlia Raymond was waiting tables, not knowing that her husband's death had just sparked a corporate revolution that would change the lives of thousands of families just like hers. 3 days after the most difficult board meeting in corporate history, Cage Daxton found himself standing outside Danny's diner at 11 p.m., not as a sleepless CEO seeking solitude, but as a man carrying documents that would change everything for the woman who had changed him. Dahlia was working her usual shift, but tonight she looked different. There was something in her posture, a lightness that hadn't been there before, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't know it yet, but news of Daxton Industries' unprecedented decision to establish a compensation fund had already started spreading through the manufacturing community. When Cage walked through those familiar doors, Dahlia looked up with surprise. She'd been wondering if she'd ever see him again after their emotional conversation about the newspaper clippings and her husband's unwavering faith in the possibility of good. "I have something for you," Cage said simply, setting a leather portfolio on the table in booth 7, the same booth where everything had started weeks ago. As Dahlia opened the documents, her hands began to tremble. The first page was a compensation agreement. Full financial compensation for Liam's death. Complete medical coverage for Tyler's heart surgery. A college fund that would ensure her son never had to worry about his education. Numbers that seemed impossible, amounts that would secure their future for generations. But Cage wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, pulling out one more document. "I'm offering you a position as the head of our new employee welfare division. Your job would be to make sure that what happened to Liam never happens to another family again." Dahlia stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to work for Daxton Industries? After everything?" "I want you to transform Daxton Industries," Cage corrected, "because you understand something that I'm still learning. You understand that behind every employee number, every safety statistic, every insurance claim, there's a real person with a real family who deserves to come home safely every day." The tears that had been building in Dahlia's eyes finally spilled over, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of grief or desperation. They were tears of hope, of possibility, of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Liam would be so proud," she whispered. "He always said that good people in positions of power could change everything. He never lost faith in that, even at the end." 6 months later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Tyler Raymond, now a healthy 9-year-old, was running through the playground behind what used to be Danny's diner. His heart surgery had been a complete success, performed by the best cardiac surgeon in the country, with every expense covered by Daxton Industries' new medical program. The diner itself had been transformed into something beautiful and unexpected. When the previous owner decided to sell to a chain restaurant, Cage had stepped in with a different proposal. Instead of another corporate franchise, Danny's Diner became the Liam Raymond Community Center, a place where working families could access resources, support, and hope. But the most remarkable transformation was happening inside the walls of Daxton Industries itself. Under Dahlia's leadership as Director of Employee Welfare, the company had implemented safety protocols that exceeded industry standards. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Workplace accidents had dropped by 90%. And for the first time in the company's history, employees spoke proudly about working for Daxton Industries. The compensation fund had grown beyond Liam's case to include dozens of other families who had been quietly suffering in the wake of preventable workplace accidents. Each family received not just financial compensation, but personal attention from Dahlia, who understood their pain in ways no corporate executive ever could. The business world had been watching, waiting for Daxton Industries to collapse under the weight of Cage's conscience-driven decisions. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The company's reputation soared. Stock prices hit record highs as investors recognized the value of genuine corporate responsibility. Employee productivity increased dramatically when workers felt truly valued and protected. Cage had proven that doing the right thing wasn't just morally correct, it was good business. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Cage's personal life. His daughter Megan, now 18 and preparing for college, had started talking to her father again. The turning point came when she read about his company's transformation in her high school newspaper. For the first time in years, she felt proud to be a Daxton. "Dad," she'd said during their first real conversation in months, "I always thought being successful meant being ruthless. But what you did for that woman and her son, that's the kind of success I want to be part of." The insomnia that had plagued Cage for years was gone. He slept peacefully now, no longer haunted by the weight of decisions that prioritized profit over people. The late-night drives had been replaced by evening visits to the community center, where he'd often find Dahlia working with families who needed support. Tonight, like so many nights over the past 6 months, Cage sat in what used to be Booth 7 at Danny's Diner. But now he wasn't alone. Emma was with him, along with Dahlia and Tyler, sharing stories and laughter in a space that had once been filled with grief and desperation. As Cage watched Tyler show Megan his drawings of the playground they were planning to expand, he thought about the note that had started everything. "I know who you are, and I know what you did to my family." At the time, those words had felt like an accusation, a threat to everything he'd built. But now he understood them differently. Dahlia hadn't been seeking revenge. She'd been offering him recognition, the chance to see himself clearly, to understand the impact of his choices, and to choose differently. The note that stopped him cold hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about the possibility of redemption, about the belief that even in the darkest circumstances, good people could make bad situations right. "You know what's funny?" Dahlia said, as if reading his thoughts. "I used to think that note was the scariest thing I'd ever written, but it turned out to be the most hopeful." Cage nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is believe in someone's capacity to change. Sometimes the most courageous act is offering forgiveness before it's asked for. And sometimes the most powerful words you can speak are the ones that challenge someone to become who they're truly meant to be. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Cage realized that his story wasn't really about a powerful CEO learning compassion. It was about a grieving widow who chose hope over hatred, faith over revenge, and love over bitterness. Dahlia Raymond had saved more than just her own family that night. She slipped him that note. She had saved his soul. The rain that had been falling the night everything changed had long since stopped. But the transformation it had set in motion continued to ripple outward, touching lives and changing futures in ways that would be felt for generations to come. Because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to believe that people can change, and one person courageous enough to prove them right. If this incredible story of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of hope has touched your heart, make sure you subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because stories like this remind us that real change is possible when we have the courage to believe in each other.